absolutism or rule of law? Which is better? Well, I guess first we have to understand what we're talking about. So I'm going to, take a stab at trying to define these things and then maybe compare and contrast them a little bit. And the context for this question is there's been an ongoing spat between propertarianism and propertarians, with whom I am affiliated online, broadly speaking, and absolutists. And this has been going on for like a year or something. I don't totally understand this debate. It hasn't been that interesting to me. I haven't really waded into it. I did just read a 100 comment plus thread on Curt Doolittle's wall. And, last summer, one of these guys in the absolutist camp sweet-talked me into an hour-long voice chat, which turned out to be pretty much a waste of my time because I didn't really understand what the hell he was talking about. And that's rare because I'm a pretty smart guy and I'm pretty well-read. And so when that happens, usually one of two things is the case. Usually, like, I'm just out of my depth, like I don't have any subject matter, knowledge, or, somebody's trying to bamboozle me by deliberately spewing nonsense. So I don't think the former was true in this case because, political economy is something I've read quite a bit about and thought quite a bit about and talked quite a bit about. So, I get the basics, I think, maybe better than most people. Not to toot my own horn. So, when something goes totally over my head, at least with this subject, I think it's pretty likely that somebody's trying to bamboozle me by talking nonsense. And that has been my impression of these absolutist characters for the most part. Like, usually I don't understand what the hell they're talking about. And, a lot of people complain about this with respect to propertarianism and Curt Doolittle. They say it's incomprehensible, that he's just spewing, jargon or whatever. I haven't found that to be the case. I started reading Curt Doolittle about 6 years ago and pretty much immediately knew what he was talking about. All right, he does use kind of an obscure idiom, kind of an obscure lexicon, and he does have some of his own definitions for things, so there is a bit of a learning curve, but what he's talking is not nonsense, and if you are intelligent and well-read, you should be able to figure it out. It's not to say it's going to be worth your while, but it is possible. That's been my experience. That's been a lot of other people's experience. Haven't had that experience with these absolutist people. It kind of just seems like they're attempting to bamboozle me and bamboozle others for purpose unknown. Probably to obtain a higher position in some hierarchy, relative to, I don't know. That's my speculation. But, so what is the difference between what is rule of law and what is absolutism and what is the difference? Well, absolutism is, I guess, discretionary rule without limits. That's my best guess. So, these absolutists always go on about how sovereignty is vested in the top of the hierarchy, the tippy top of the pyramid, and that's where sovereignty is vested or resides or where it flows from or whatever. And, this is a justification for hierarchies, I suppose, and for putting somebody in particular at the very top of one. And so it's easy to see why somebody would maybe make these kind of arguments. And they say sovereignty is vested in, this top of the hierarchy, I guess. And if you were to limit their exercise of that sovereignty, that is in itself an exercise of sovereignty. And so, that's vesting sovereignty somewhere else besides the top of the hierarchy, which I guess is contrary to absolutism. So, I suppose absolutism implies discretionary rule by whoever is at the top of the hierarchy without limits from below. Because according to them, all sovereignty either has to be or is vested in the, head of the hierarchy. However you construct that. I think I'm summarizing their position reasonably accurately, although, as I said before, I haven't made much headway in understanding it myself. But I think that's a reasonably fair summary of their position. And this does not conform to my understanding of sovereignty or power or hierarchies or how they work empirically. So these people make a lot of logical arguments and even maybe illogical arguments, because they seem to border on postmodernism at times with their rhetoric. But let's say logical arguments. And the problem with logical systems is it's very easy to construct a logical system of bullshit if you're not comparing it to external reality, to empirical, measurable fact, and checking your logic against reality, so to speak. So I fall into the critical rationalist epistemology, where you can use logic as a critical filter. You can use empirical measurement as a critical filter. You're not using logic to positively build up justifications or arguments, because that way you can build a logical castle in the sky with no connection to reality. And you're not using empirical observation to induce the truth by observing, or truth theories by observing empirical facts, because of the problem of induction. You can't actually do that. Go read David Hume. I don't really have time, I think, to summarize all that, but you can use both empiricism and logic as critical filters to weed out bad theories. And this is already getting kind of sidetracked, but we'll get back to the absolutism versus rule of law. So my understanding of how hierarchies work is that hierarchies are negotiated by cooperating people. And I would say that sovereignty is vested in every member of a society or every member of a hierarchy who can plan, who can calculate, who can act, and who accepts responsibility for the consequences of their actions, no matter what their position within that hierarchy is. And then as far as the actual positions within the hierarchy, those are negotiated. So, people back leaders who gain their trust and their confidence and their loyalty. And leaders do that by offering people things that they want and things that they value primarily, such as good decision making, reciprocity, loyalty in return, material and intangible benefits, various other things. And one of the things that leaders can offer and do offer is discretionary authority, because we want our leaders to have some discretion. That's part of their job, is to decide things, and there are a lot of things that it's helpful to have a leader to decide, and to have some discretion to decide. So there are things where there's a best decision. Let's say objectively, maybe there's one decision that's best, a particular decision, and then we want their choices constrained to that best decision. There might be cases where, there's an intersubjectively best decision. So the criteria for best or whatever may be subjective, but there might be some intersubjective agreement where we all kind of agree on the best decision, and then we still want to kind of limit the decision-making to that, or guide it to that. But there are cases where there isn't an objectively best decision, or there isn't an objectively intersubjectively best decision, but we may still want somebody to make a decision. It might be more important that a decision is made in many cases than what decision is made, and so that's why we want a leader with discretionary authority. Now, most of us also want a leader who accepts some limits on that authority, or who offers us some protections, maybe against arbitrary exercise of that authority, or unaccountable exercise of that authority. And so, in order to become a leader, somebody has to amass a certain amount of support, even if they're trying to intimidate and coerce others. they have to have some supporters to do that. They can't do that by themselves. So, any leader has to amass a certain amount of support and has to do that by offering people things that they want, which may include discretionary authority, which may include limits on their discretionary authority, or protections against, possible arbitrary exercise of their discretionary authority. And so, if we define absolutism as absolute discretionary authority without limits, because that's the only consistent way to, let's say, vest sovereignty in the head of the hierarchy and no one else, which is what absolutists demand, that's absolutism, then rule of law is just limits on discretionary authority. And, we don't want absolutism, except unless you are an absolutist, but we do want some discretionary authority because, let's use an example like Trump. Trump got elected because he was a bit of a rule breaker, because he was a bit unpredictable. People wanted that from him. And, because he's a bit of a meanie, right? They wanted that from him. They wanted him to bully the people that we don't like and who have been harassing and, making life miserable for us for a long time. We wanted that from him. Now, and we may be able to put up with a lot in order to obtain that. Personally, all this stuff about Russia and like Trump's business dealings or whatever, this doesn't matter to me. And it doesn't matter to most people who voted for him because, even if there is a little bit of corruption or whatever of the self-enriching variety, it doesn't matter. Like, he's worth that if he's going to do what we want him to do and go after the people that we want him to go after and be unpredictable for them and mean to them and bully them and, be our junkyard dog, so to speak. Then, he's offering us a little bit of discretionary authority. He's offering us a little bit of that, like strongman character and strongman quality that we want in this situation, which is fundamentally a system of conflict, a situation of conflict, not cooperation. We are in a state of conflict with various enemy factions that are dogging us and parasitizing us and damaging our interests in all sorts of ways, and we want somebody to damage them back and dog them back, and we don't want them to follow the rules and pull their punches and stand on principle or any of that kind of stuff, right? But by the same token, Trump can go out and he can be a bit lecherous or not adhere to strict family values or whatever, or do other things. But I don't want him fucking my wife. I don't even want him insulting my wife. He can insult my enemies' wives. That's fine. He can insult female enemies. That's fine. But I do want some limits on his behavior. I don't want him to do that towards me or towards people that I like. So in that sense, from Trump, I demand both a certain amount of discretionary authority of the unpredictable, like rule-breaking, meanie behavior, coercive, kind of bully character. I do want a little bit of a despot in that respect. And I actually want, to be perfectly honest, a lot more despotism than Trump is delivering. But, I also want some protections on the other hand. And I want some guarantees that won't be turned against me. And so we might call those rule of law, and there are a variety of ways of, creating those incentives and enforcing them. And basically, what it boils down to is you have to be willing to withdraw your support and even offer your opposition to your own leader should he go too far out of bounds, as far as you conceive of it. And that's where rule of law comes from, because ultimately sovereignty is kind of distributed throughout the hierarchy. So the king gets to choose, I get to choose, you get to choose, everybody gets to choose what they do. And they might face consequences for that. That could be retaliation from somebody at your level within the hierarchy. It could be repression from somebody above you in the hierarchy. Or it could be revolt from somebody below you in the hierarchy, right? Those are all consequences of your choices, potentially. And so anyone who's making choices and planning and anticipating the consequences of those choices and accepting the consequences of those choices is sovereign in some sense. And hierarchies are what emerge from, the negotiation between all those sovereign peoples with somebody at the top, and we want somebody at the top, and we want them to have a little bit of discretion, but not absolute.